On a bright Sunday morning, the sun streamed through the stained glass windows of Maplewood Community Church, casting colorful patterns on the polished wooden pews. The air buzzed with the warmth of fellowship as congregants exchanged greetings and laughter, their voices a harmonious backdrop to the day's anticipation. Samuel Reed, an 82-year-old widower, sat in his usual spot in the front row, his hands clasped together in his lap. He often came early to soak in the familiar ambiance, relishing the memories of walking hand in hand with his late wife, Margaret, into this very sanctuary. As he gazed around the room, his eyes fell on the faces of both old friends and newer members. Some had children who played together during Sunday school. Others were young couples, their expressions filled with the excitement of new beginning. Samuel's heart ached with bittersweet nostalgia. He remembered how Margaret would lean in to whisper her thoughts about the sermon, her laughter ringing like a bell amidst the solemnity of the service. Today, however, Samuel felt a change in the air, a sense of unease that he couldn't quite place. The service began, and the congregation settled into a respectful silence. Pastor James stood at the pulpit, his voice resonating with warmth and authority as he welcomed everyone. Yet, it was not the pastor's message that stirred the congregation's anticipation. It was the presence of Thomas Hale, the church's ambitious 38-year-old leader. Thomas had recently been vocal about his desire to modernize the church, aiming to attract a younger demographic and introduce new practices that he deemed necessary for growth. As he stepped up to the stage, a palpable tension rippled through the pews. Samuel felt it acutely, his heart thumping as he prepared for what was to come. Thomas cleared his throat, his confident demeanor masking the underlying dismissiveness that Samuel had begun to sense. "Good morning, everyone," he began, scanning the room. "Today, I want to share my vision for the future of Maple. Our church has a rich history, but to thrive, we must shed some of our outdated traditions." Those words hung heavy in the air, and Samuel's brow furrowed. He could feel the murmurs of concern among the congregants, the worry etched on their faces as they exchanged glances. Thomas continued, his voice rising with enthusiasm. "We need to embrace change, to attract new members. We have to be willing to let go of what no longer serves us." With a pointed look toward Samuel, he added, "Perhaps it's time for some of our more seasoned members to step aside and allow fresh ideas to take root." Samuel's heart sank. He felt the sting of humiliation wash over him, not just for himself, but for the values he held dear. He had dedicated his life to this church and its community, and the idea that experience and tradition were being dismissed so casually felt like a personal attack. The congregation murmured again, uncertainty palpable, as they absorbed Thomas's word. After the service concluded, Samuel made his way to the coffee table, hoping to connect with friends in the warmth of familiar conversation. He poured himself a cup of steaming coffee, the aroma grounding him amidst the whirlwind of emotion. Just as he began to chat with a couple of fellow church members, Thomas approached him, his expression condescending. "Samuel, perhaps it's time you consider stepping back," he suggested, his tone dripping with faux sympathy. "We need to make room for new leadership, new ideas. You've done your part." Samuel took a deep breath, his heart racing, but he maintained his composure. "Thomas," he replied gently, "wisdom doesn't diminish with age. The strength of our community lies in the blend of experience and innovation. We can't forget the roots from which we've grown." As he walked away, he noticed a few congregants exchanging worried glances, their brows furrowed in concern. Samuel felt the weight of his community's unease on his shoulder. He wished to bridge the gap between the past and future, but as he pondered the confrontation, he wondered if he could really make a difference in the face of such ambition. The flickering candlelight around him seemed to echo his uncertainty, but deep down, Samuel knew that forgiveness and understanding were vital for healing. He just hoped that Thomas would eventually see the truth in his word. The committee room was a kaleidoscope of emotions as Samuel Reed entered, the air thick with tension. A long table stretched across the room, surrounded by church members whose expressions ranged from skepticism to curiosity. Samuel, an 82-year-old widower, carried a handcrafted wooden box under one arm. As he approached the table, he could feel the weight of their gazes, some intrigued, others doubtful. Pastor James, seated at the head of the table, nodded in support, encouraging Samuel to speak. "Thank you for allowing me a moment," Samuel began, his voice steady despite the charged atmosphere. "I brought something that I believe is important for our discussion today." He placed the wooden box gently on the table, the surface polished to a shine that reflected the overhead light. The box, adorned with intricate carvings of vines and leaves, had been a labor of love, a testament to his years of craftsmanship and devotion to the church. As he opened the box, a hush fell over the room. Inside lay neatly folded slips of paper, each one holding a name or a prayer written in Samuel's delicate handwriting. "These are the names of our members, past and present, who have faced struggle," he explained, his eyes scanning the room. "I thought it fitting that we remember them in our deliberations today, especially as we consider the future of our church." Thomas, seated across from Samuel, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "And what exactly are you suggesting, Samuel?" he asked, his tone tinged with skepticism. "Are we to be held back by the ghosts of the past?" His voice was firm, an undercurrent of impatience running through his words. Samuel met Thomas's gaze, unflinching. "Not ghosts, Thomas. These are lives, stories that have shaped what we are today. Even you, in your ambition to lead us towards modernization, are part of this tapestry." He picked up a slip from the box, reading aloud a name that echoed through the room. "This is for you, Thomas. I've prayed for you since the loss of your father." The unexpected acknowledgement hung in the air, and Thomas's expression faltered, surprise flickering in his eyes. The room fell silent, the members exchanging glances, caught off guard by Samuel's vulnerability. Thomas struggled to find his words, the hardened exterior he wore beginning to crack. You prayed for me?" he finally managed, his voice softer, almost incredulous. "Yes," Samuel replied, his tone gentle. "After your father passed, my wife and I prayed for your comfort and strength. We understood how hard it was for you." He paused, the memories flooding back, filling his eyes with a hint of nostalgia. "Your father was a good man, and he loved this church dearly. I believed he would want you to find peace. Kindness spreads faster than you think." Subscribe, like this video, and share it with family members. A single click could brighten someone's day. Thomas shifted in his seat, the weight of Samuel's words pressing down on him. "I didn't know," he began, his voice trailing off. The tension in the room morphed into something more profound, a shared vulnerability that united them momentarily. The other committee members watched, their expressions a mix of empathy and concern as they witnessed the unfolding dynamic. Samuel took a deep breath, his heart swelling with compassion. "We all carry burdens, Thomas. My age does not mean I don't see the potential in your ideas, but we must tread carefully, honoring those who paved the way for us." He looked around the room, his gaze steady. "I can assure you that the wisdom of the past and the innovation of the future can coexist. We must be willing to listen to one another." A murmur of agreement rippled through the congregation. Thomas's defenses began to lower as he absorbed Samuel's words. "I see your point," he replied slowly, the fight in him dissipated. "Perhaps I have been too focused on my vision, without fully considering the history we share." As the meeting continued, the atmosphere shifted. Discussions that had started with tension transformed into a dialogue of respect and understanding. Samuel's willingness to share his heart, paired with his gentle wisdom, opened a door Thomas had not realized was closed. The committee members began to engage more openly, sharing their own stories and struggles, creating a safe space where they could explore the delicate balance between tradition and innovation. By the time the meeting concluded, a palpable tension had morphed into a quiet camaraderie. Thomas sat back in his chair, visibly shaken, but also transformed. Samuel smiled softly, sensing that something significant had shifted, not just between him and Thomas, but within the entire room. The journey towards healing and understanding had only just begun, but for the first time it felt like they were all moving in the right direction together. Days passed since the committee meeting, and the air in the church seemed to thrum with unspoken words and unresolved tension. Thomas found himself deep in thought, replaying Samuel's heartfelt speech over and over in his mind. The old man's vulnerability had struck a chord within him. It was a rare glimpse into the life of someone who had dedicated decades to the church, and Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he had misjudged Samuel. After the service one Sunday, Thomas spotted Samuel at the back of the sanctuary, admiring the stained glass windows that filtered the sunlight into a kaleidoscope of color. Taking a deep breath, he approached the elder. "Samuel," Thomas began, his voice tentative. "Can we talk for a moment?" Samuel turned to him, his expression warm yet curious. "Of course, Thomas. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about what you said at the meeting," Thomas confessed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I owe you an apology. I shouldn't have dismissed your thoughts so easily." Samuel's eyes sparkled with understanding. "We all have our moments of pride. What matters is that we learn from them. I want to work together on the upcoming church event," Thomas said, his tone more earnest. "I believe we could blend your ideas with mine. Maybe we can find a way to modernize without losing what makes our church special." Samuel smiled, a hint of relief washing over his features. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. I'd love to collaborate." As they began to discuss the event, their conversation flowed effortlessly. Thomas shared his vision for a community outreach program that would attract younger members, while Samuel spoke passionately about incorporating traditional hymns and family values into the event. "You know," Thomas said, leaning against a pew, "I've realized how much you've contributed to the church over the years. I didn't appreciate your wisdom before." Samuel chuckled softly. "Wisdom is often lost on the young, but I understand. You're ambitious, and that's admirable. Just remember that ambition needs a foundation, and that's where tradition comes in." "Right," Thomas replied, nodding thoughtfully. "I see that now. It's just, sometimes I feel like we need to shake things up to keep people interested. Change can be necessary, but it should never come at the expense of our roots," Samuel explained, his voice steady. "The stories and values that have shaped this church are what will keep it alive for generations to come." As they continued to work together, a bond began to form between them. Thomas found himself sharing more personal stories, revealing glimpses of his own struggles and aspirations. Samuel listened intently, offering insights that showed a genuine interest in Thomas's perspective. However, despite their growing camaraderie, Thomas still wrestled with doubts about fully embracing the traditions Samuel cherished. During one of their planning sessions, he gathered the courage to propose a radical change to the event's format. "I think we should consider a more contemporary approach," Thomas said, his voice steady but his heart racing. "What if we turn the service into a concert? It could draw in a lot of new faces." "Hey!" Samuel paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in Thomas's suggestion. "A concert? That's quite a departure from our usual format. What about the message we want to convey? Music can uplift, but it can also overshadow the purpose of our gathering." "I get that, but people want to feel engaged," Thomas insisted, his impatience bubbling to the surface. "We can still incorporate the message. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Tradition has its own power, Thomas. It offers a sense of belonging and stability," Samuel countered, his tone firm yet calm. "We can innovate, but we must respect the foundation we stand on." A tense silence fell between them, the weight of their differing views palpable. Thomas felt frustration churn inside him, and he shook his head in exasperation. "I just don't think we can keep doing things the same way forever. We'll lose everyone if we don't adapt," he shot back, his voice rising. Samuel sighed, his expression a mixture of disappointment and understanding. "Sometimes it's not about adapting, but rather about finding harmony between old and new. We can't afford to alienate those who have built this church with their love and sacrifice." Feeling overwhelmed, Thomas abruptly stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I need some air," he muttered, storming out of the room. As he stepped outside, the cool breeze hit his face, and he felt a mix of anger and confusion. He hadn't expected the conversation to escalate like that, and a part of him felt guilty for walking away. Yet another part of him was frustrated that Samuel couldn't see the urgency of change. Standing alone in the church's garden, Thomas took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing within him. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the flowers that Samuel had tended to with such care. He couldn't deny the beauty of it all, yet he felt a disconnect between the past and the future. In the serene embrace of the church garden, Samuel Reed knelt among the vibrant flowers, their colors a stark contrast to the turmoil that had clouded his heart. The sun cast gentle rays upon him, illuminating his weathered face as he closed his eyes, seeking solace in prayer. With each breath, he recalled the soothing voice of his late wife, Evelyn, who had often reminded him of the virtues of patience and understanding. "In the garden of life, Samuel," she would say, "we must nurture even the tiniest seeds of kindness, for they blossom into forgiveness." As he rose, A sense of clarity washed over him. Samuel felt compelled to reach out to Thomas once more. He understood that bridging the gap between tradition and modernity required more than just dialogue. It demanded empathy and genuine connection. With renewed determination, he decided to invite Thomas for a walk in the garden, hoping to mend the rift that had formed between them. The next Sunday, after the service, Samuel spotted Thomas lingering by the church entrance, his brow furrowed in thought. With a warm smile, Samuel approached him. "Thomas, would you join me for a walk in the garden? I think it's time we talk." Thomas hesitated for a moment, the weight of their previous disagreements evident in his posture. But, sensing the sincerity in Samuel's invitation, he nodded slowly. "Sure, Samuel, I'd like that." As they walked along the winding path, the air filled with the sweet scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass, Samuel began to share stories of the church's history, tales of hope and resilience that echoed through the years. "This garden, Thomas," he said, gesturing to the vibrant flora, "was planted by my wife and me many years ago. Each flower tells a story of faith, of people who found solace here. It's a testament to our community." Thomas listened intently, his expression softening as he absorbed Samuel's words. "I never knew," he admitted, glancing around as if seeing the garden for the first time. "I've been so focused on change that I've overlooked the richness of our past." Samuel nodded, his heart swelling with hope. "Change is vital, Thomas, but it must be rooted in our tradition. The stories we carry shape who we are. It's important to honor them, even as we move forward." Just as a sense of understanding began to blossom between them, their conversation was abruptly interrupted by the hurried arrival of Marjorie, a longtime church member. Her face was pale, and a sense of urgency filled her voice. "Samuel, Thomas, you need to come quickly. There's been a financial crisis. Our church is at risk." The news hung heavily in the air, altering the mood of the once peaceful garden. Samuel exchanged a worried glance with Thomas, both men suddenly aware of the stakes involved. "What do you mean, Marjorie?" Samuel asked, his heart racing. "There's been a significant drop in donation, and the committee is meeting to address it. We need to act fast before it's too late," explained, her voice trembling slightly. Samuel felt a knot forming in his stomach. This was the moment they had to confront the challenges facing their church. With a heavy sigh, he turned to Thomas, who was already processing the implications. "We should go," Thomas said, determination seeping into his voice. "We can't let this place fall apart." As they made their way back to the church, Samuel's mind raced with thoughts of the traditions he cherished and the changes he had reluctantly accepted. He understood that this crisis could either bring them together or further divide them. "Thomas," he began, "we need to approach this with both our perspectives in mind. We can't afford to lose what makes our church a home for so many." "I agree," Thomas replied, his eyes focused ahead, "but we also need innovative solutions. Perhaps we can think outside the box?" Samuel nodded, appreciating the shift in Thomas's tone. "Let's present a united front. Our community needs to see that we can blend the old with the new." As they entered the church, the atmosphere was charged with anxiety, yet there was also a flicker of hope. Samuel took a deep breath, steeling himself for the discussions ahead. He realized that this crisis could be the pivotal moment in their relationship, a chance to forge a new understanding that honored both tradition and innovation. And as they stepped into the room filled with concerned faces, Samuel felt that perhaps, just perhaps, they were on the brink of something transformative, a convergence of hearts and minds that could redefine their church's future. The emergency meeting commenced with an air thick with tension, the kind that seemed to wrap around the congregants like a heavy blanket. Samuel Reed settled into his chair, his heart pounding in his chest as he looked around the room. Faces that were usually warm and welcoming now wore expressions of worry and frustration. Thomas stood at the front, brimming with determination, but also a hint of desperation. The church's financial troubles loomed over them like a dark cloud, and they all felt its weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to act now," Thomas began, his voice steady despite the anxiety in the room. "I propose we make drastic cuts to our program. We can no longer afford to uphold traditions that don't bring in revenue." His gaze shifted around the room, landing on Samuel, whose face remained calm yet resolute. "Thomas," Samuel interjected, standing up slowly, his old bones creaking in protest, "I understand the urgency, but we cannot disregard the very roots of our church. These traditions have been the backbone of this community for generations." His voice was firm but gentle, and the room fell silent, all ears on the elder. "Samuel, with all due respect," Thomas replied, a hint of frustration creeping into his tone. "Those roots are what's dragging us down. We need to look forward, not backward." He crossed his arms, his youthful impatience palpable. "Forward, without acknowledging where we came from?" Samuel countered, his eyes piercing through the tension. "That's a dangerous path." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "We need to find a way to honor our past while navigating these turbulent waters. There's wisdom in both the old and the new." The discussion quickly escalated, voices rising as members began to chime in, some siding with Thomas's modern approach, while others rallied behind Samuel's plea for tradition. The room felt like a battlefield of ideals, and Samuel could feel the weight of the community's trust resting heavily on his shoulder. He knew that if they couldn't find common ground, the fabric of their church might tear apart. Just when it seemed that the meeting was about to spiral into chaos, a younger member, Claire, raised her hand hesitantly. "I have an idea," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The room quieted, all eyes on her. "What if we blend some of our traditional events with modern fundraising techniques? We could hold a community fair, honoring our traditions while also inviting new faces and ideas." Samuel's heart raced with hope as he exchanged glances with Thomas. "That's a brilliant idea, Claire," he encouraged, his voice steady now. "We could incorporate storytelling sessions about our church's history alongside food stalls featuring traditional recipes." Thomas, initially skeptical, found himself intrigued. "And we could use social media to spread the word," he added, a spark igniting in his eyes. "We could create an event that not only raises funds, but also celebrates who we are as a community." The atmosphere in the room shifted from one of tension to collaborative energy. Samuel could see the gears turning in Thomas's mind, and for the first time, he sensed the potential for genuine collaboration. The committee began buzzing with excitement, brainstorming ways to merge the old with the new. Ideas flew across the table, fireflies in the night, illuminating a path forward. As the meeting came to a close, Samuel felt a glimmer of hope. He had entered the room bracing for conflict, but now he was filled with a sense of purpose. "Thank you, everyone," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "Today, we have taken a step toward healing our community. Together, we can navigate this crisis." Thomas, standing beside him, nodded slowly, his earlier frustration fading. "I appreciate each of you for contributing your thoughts. Let's make this fair a reality and show that we can honor our past while forging a new future." There was a newfound respect in his tone, a recognition that perhaps Samuel's wisdom was not a hindrance, but rather an invaluable asset. As the committee members filed out, Samuel felt a sense of lightness in his heart. He had witnessed the power of unity and forgiveness, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, he believed that together they could weather any storm. Thomas, once an adversary, now stood beside him as an ally, and Samuel couldn't help but smile, hopeful for what lay ahead. As the fundraising efforts gained momentum, the church community began to rally around Samuel and Thomas. The atmosphere was electric, filled with the sounds of laughter, lively discussions, and the aroma of baked goods wafting through the air. Samuel stood behind a table adorned with handmade crafts and donated goods, his heart swelling with pride as he witnessed the congregation come together for a common cause. Thomas, energized by the support, was busy coordinating volunteers, his demeanor shifting from the brashness that had characterized him before to a more collaborative spirit. However, just as the event reached its peak, Thomas's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, his heart sinking as he realized it was a call from his estranged sister, Lisa. He hesitated before answering, the weight of familial tensions hanging in the air like a storm cloud. "Hello," he said, forcing a calmness into his voice despite the turmoil brewing inside him. "Thomas, you need to come home. I found something. Something about Dad." Lisa's voice trembled on the other end. He felt a chill run down his spine, the mention of their father immediately shifting his focus from the event to his past, a past he had tried to escape. "What do you mean? Is everything okay?" he asked, concern threading through his words. "It's about his donation to the church. It's It's significant, and I think you should know, she replied, her tone urgent. The mention of the church sent a jolt through him, and he felt a mix of dread and intrigue. I'll be there, Thomas said, cutting the call abruptly. He turned to Samuel, who was discussing plans with a group of members nearby. Samuel, I need to take a moment. I'll be back, Thomas said, his voice strained as he hurried out of the church hall, leaving behind the bustling energy. Outside, the world felt muted as Thomas drove to his childhood home, memories flooding back, his father's stern demeanor, the quiet strength that often masked vulnerability. Once there, Lisa was waiting, her expression grave. I found Dad's old files. He had a plan for his legacy, she said, leading him to the small study that smelled of aged paper and faded memory. As she rifled through the paper, Thomas's heart raced. What kind of plan? He asked, anxiety threading his. He left a significant donation to church. He wanted to keep it a secret until the right moment, but I think he wanted you to use it to help the community, Lisa revealed, her eyes searching his for understanding. The weight of her words crashed over him, forcing Thomas to confront a truth he had long avoided. His father had dedicated his life to the church, a place Thomas had distanced himself from in pursuit of his own ambition. Why didn't he ever tell me? He whispered, feeling the sting of regret. He thought you would find your own way back, Lisa replied softly. He believed in you, Thomas. As the realization sank in, Thomas felt a profound shift within himself. He had been so consumed by his desire to modernize the church that he had overlooked the very foundation upon which it stood, his father's legacy. It was a legacy built on love, community, and faith. With newfound clarity, he knew he had to return to Samuel and the congregation. Back at the church, Thomas found Samuel surrounded by the members, their laughter ringing in the air. It was a stark contrast to the storm that had just raged within him. Clearing his throat, he stepped forward, drawing the attention of everyone present. I have something important to share, he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. Samuel turned, concern etched on his face, as he noticed the gravity of Thomas's demeanor. What is it, Thomas? He asked, sensing a shift in the younger man. I just learned something about my father. He left a significant donation for the church, meant to be revealed at the right time, Thomas confessed, his voice cracking slightly. I didn't realize how much he valued this place, how much he wanted me to find my purpose here. A hush fell over the room as the weight of his admission settled in. Samuel stepped forward, his eyes softening. Your father's love for this church runs deep. He wanted you to embrace your roots, to understand the importance of community, he said gently. Thomas felt the tears prick his eyes as Samuel wrapped him in a warm embrace. I'm sorry for the way I treated you, for the way I dismissed your wisdom, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I've learned so much from you, Samuel. The congregation watched as the two men, once adversaries, stood united in their shared purpose. They had both learned something invaluable that day: love, forgiveness, and the strength found in connection. As they embraced once more, the church seemed to glow with a newfound light, the spirit of grace and redemption filling the air. The community had emerged stronger, bound together by the lessons of the past and the hope for the future. Every story leaves a mark on your heart, and this playlist is filled with stories that you won't forget. Let these lessons guide and inspire you. Click now and let the emotions flow.